Hi, I'm Terry Burns, and I've been teaching a class on the Monas Hieroglyphica of Dr. John Dee. And this is part of my associated playlist on wordplays in the hieroglyphic monad. But this one's a little bit different. I just want to talk about what a hieroglyph is. It seems like, since that's the title, that's important. And we've been really zeroing in on things within the letter to Maximilian and then in the theorems. But let's just talk about what a hieroglyph itself would mean in Dee's time and how it would relate to words we might know like hierophant or hierarchy. So here is Dee's hieroglyphic monad, as you know, and you know that what he's doing in the theorems is taking it apart and putting it back together using all kinds of anagogical, mathematic, and Kabbalistic correspondences for his theory of everything. But he's saying this is a hieroglyph. Well, today we associate hieroglyphs with ancient Egypt. They didn't until about the 1600s. Writers like Athanasius Kircher has a whole book about, it's kind of about the sacred mysteries of Egypt, except it's really not, because he gets a lot of stuff wrong. However, he also borrows a lot of stuff from Dee, like this symbol, which isn't Egyptian. So anyway, that's the 1600s. But remember, the hieroglyphic monad is written in 1564. If you look at, say, the Oxford English Dictionary, you will see that there's not an association of hieroglyph with Egypt in 1564. So that's the most important kind of takeaway from this whole video. But we're going to have a little fun and take a quick look at the appearance of Egyptian hieroglyphs in Renaissance Europe and see what a word like hieroglyph would mean to a scholar of ancient Greek like John Dee, since these words in Latin come into Latin from ancient Greek. And the word hieroglyph doesn't actually show up in English till 1598. That's after Dee writes the Monas Hieroglyph in Latin, obviously. And it's what's called a back formation, which means there's this adjectival form, and from that you form a noun. Backwards, it's usually you'd have a noun and you go the other direction. But guess what it comes from? Surprise, two works, the hieroglyphic monad and the hieroglyphics of Hor Apollo. But this actually comes into English after the hieroglyphic monad, even though this work comes out in 1505. And it's a strange work, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, because if you're looking at this time period, you're already interested in the time period, you got to see this work. It is so strange. So the Oxford English Dictionary will just tell us that the Latin word comes from an ancient Greek hieroglyphikos. So we might ask, does the ancient Greek word refer to Egyptian writing? Because if it did, since Dee is a preeminent scholar of ancient Greek, he might, unbeknownst to anyone, have Egyptian hieroglyphs in mind. Well, then you'd have to go and look at the ancient Greek word and see if it refers to Egyptian writing. What we know in ancient Greek it's pretty clear. It comes from hieros, which means something that's holy, something that's sacred, something connected to the gods. And a glyph is something that is carved. Writing is a type of glyph. A symbol is a type of glyph. So, all right. Now, that means that basically a hieroglyph is sacred writing, sacred symbol, and that's the way John Dee is using it. But wait, we might also notice some other words in English it's related to, like hierarchy. Now, I don't particularly like hierarchies myself, but the way we use hierarchy in English isn't the way it used to be used. It was the rule of a high priest, which, you know, not arguing for or against. I'm saying that's what the word comes from. And so it would come from the word for ruling and the word for a high priest, which comes from the hieros, holy, sacred, connected to the gods. Or sometimes you hear in English the word hierophant, especially those of you interested in John Dee, since there are some later things that Dee does that are often taken up by societies that have hierophants. So that comes from, again, the word holy and the word to reveal. So you have the English explanation of hierophant as the revealer or the expounder of the mysteries. In ancient Greece, that's particularly the priest who was going to interpret the Eleusinian mysteries. Now then, let's change the question a little and say, could the ancient Greek word that was used by Plutarch refer to Egyptian writing? And that's where the jury's still out. It's kind of a fascinating question because the word, the hieroglyph for hieroglyph, now talking about the way we use it now, the ancient Greek hieroglyph for hieroglyph means sacred word. What we don't know is the Greek word a back formation from that. But whether or not the ancient Greeks could read hieroglyphs, Renaissance Europeans could not. I mean, they just could not. And sadly, there are some who thought they could. Fortunately for us, John Dee wasn't among them. But just for fun, we're going to take a look at one that is online. This is from Princeton University Press. This is the Hieroglyphics of Horapollo. And both the translator, George Boas, and Anthony Grafton, who writes the foreword, go out of their way to say, this is what Horapollo says the hieroglyphs mean isn't what they mean. And that's real interesting because allegedly Horapollo is a late priest of the Egyptian mysteries. Many people don't really believe he was, but supposedly he was a priest of the Egyptian mysteries. And supposedly there's a Greek version of this text where he's explaining the hieroglyphs that people in the Egyptian mysteries don't know in the 5th century. Jury's out whether anyone really believes that's true or not. But then this Greek version from the 7th century AD is discovered in 1422. It's printed in 1505. And weirdly, it's going to connect very indirectly back to our Monas Hieroglyphica story because Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, who is the namesake of Maximilian II, who Dee writes the Monad to. And remember, he was a great patron of occultists. He was himself an alchemist. And his circle of associations would include people like Trithemius, Pico de Mirandola, and the famous artist Albert Dürer. He got a copy bound together with the Book of Aesop's Fables. Kind of an odd combination there. There's older translations of this online on sacred text from translations now in the public domain, like one from Corey in 1840, where you notice he doesn't even bother translating the ancient Greek. He just does some things here. If you can see by looking at the later translation that this is not a side-by-side English and ancient Greek, though it is purporting to be one. And you'll also think, if you remember our context for the Monas Hieroglyphica, one of them is the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. It seems like that there is this idea of what the Hermetic, the Emerald Tablet is influencing how this explanation of hieroglyphs is going. So we're told that ancient Egyptians, to denote eternity, they depict the sun and the moon, just like Hermes or Thoth, or anyway. It's a terrible translation. It's culturally interesting. It has nothing to do with Egyptian hieroglyphs, though it purports to. And luckily, Dee's Monas Hieroglyphia never purports to have anything to do with Egyptian hieroglyphs. So the final word, his Monas Hieroglyphica, has nothing to do with Egyptian hieroglyphs. It has everything to do with sacred symbols and writing. Thanks a lot, and I will see you in my next wordplay video. Bye for now.